When the hour of the state dinner had arrived, the emperor left his apartments to go meet his father-in-law and the Empress of Austria. He came back soon afterwards, holding the latter by the hand, and led her to the salon. Emperor Francis came immediately after him, followed by most of the guests. When everything was ready, the prefect went to announce the emperor that the dinner was served. Almost immediately, the door of the salon opened, and the emperor appeared, leading the Empress of Austria, the Emperor of Austria giving his arm to the Empress. The latter placed her father on her right, and the emperor placed the Empress of Austria on his. The King of Prussia was on Marie Louise's left hand, the King of Saxony, the Grand Duke of Würzburg, and all the other guest personages, princes and princesses, whose name I do not recollect, occupied the other places at the table. The assemblage was most brilliant, and the table magnificently served. The emperor was especially amiable to the Empress of Austria and showed her all sorts of attentions. The princess had very beautiful eyes. I noticed that she did not take off her gloves to eat. The conversation was sufficiently gay and animated. The emperor gave the guests time to swallow the pieces. The Emperor of Austria and the Grand Duke of Würzburg were not the fattest of the party. The two together, although both were very tall, did not weigh more than an ordinary man. Both had sharp faces like an eagle and legs like spindles. The Emperor Francis had a very long queue, which reached almost below his waist. Rustam handed the dishes to the emperor's pages and I to the empresses. The Grand Duke of Würzburg, recognizing me as having served him as outrider, looked at me several times and smiled like one seeing an old acquaintance again. During the whole time, the emperor and empress were at Dresden. There were nothing but fetes, but then Napoleon was all-powerful and blazing with glory. Before we arrived at Thorn, we had a very sandy stretch of road to pass, and the carriage went slowly. The emperor stopped it and got out. He asked for his boots, which I put on him, and he mounted the horse of one of his suite and galloped off, leaving me with the carriage to get along as I could. When the emperor left Thorn, I accompanied him. His dinner was prepared in a little town through which he was to pass, and which was several leagues from Thorn. When we reached the appointed spot, the emperor, seeing a number of people around the carriage, got out to receive the notables and immediately got in again instead of going to the house where they were expecting him, and gave orders to drive on. The disappointment was probably great among the crowd, a larger number of whom had very likely come from a distance in order to have the pleasure of seeing him and of looking at him for a while. After going a league or a league and a half, the emperor stopped before the house of a poor woman. He wanted to dine there. The suite was large. Besides his usual escort, there were several general officers, including General Krasinski, colonel of the Polish Lancers of the Guard. Everyone got down, and generals and officers hastened to carry the chairs and tables from the poor dwelling into the middle of the courtyard. I laid the table and put it on some bottles of wine. They made a fire in which they placed a cauldron half full of water. They asked the good woman for eggs, as she had only a few. She went to get more from the neighboring houses. When the eggs were brought, they were placed in the cauldron, where they cooked after a fashion. This cooking was done 2 or 3 steps from where the emperor sat down. The eggs were a long time in cooking. Too much water had been put in. Finally, when they were nearly right, everyone sat down. That is, the principal individuals, for the others had to stand or sit on anything they could find. When the meal was finished, the emperor sent for the poor people who lived in the house and questioned them through General Krasinski. Among other things, he asked what their fortune was and of what it consisted. The poor woman, looking about her, showed the general her chickens, which were scratching here and there, and said, "There is everything that I possess." "If I gave her some money," said the emperor, "would she be pleased?" "She could buy the house she lives in and buy more chickens." This suggestion was too welcome to the woman for her face not to show gratitude and joy. The emperor had 1,000 or 1,200 francs in gold given her, and she threw herself at his feet, which she kissed to show her gratitude. During the journey from Kovno to Vilna, I heard of great storm by which the army lost a large number of horses, which was said to amount to 30,000. But so far as I was concerned, I saw nothing of it. After spending a number of days at Vilna, the emperor started for Vitebsk. When he arrived there, as he went into his room to undress, the emperor said to Seneschal, "We will go no farther. The campaign is finished. We will make our winter quarters here." Alas, why did this not happen? The emperor learned of the death of General Dorsen, and it was on the public square of Vitas that he named his successor, General Friant. The grenadiers and the chasseurs were assembled, and in line of battle, the emperor drew his sword, something which he very rarely did, and pronounced in a voice loud but full of emotion the formula, "Soldiers, you will know." Then he warmly embraced the general, who, on receiving the accolade, could not prevent his tears from being seen. This nomination was too solemn and too rare not to produce a profound effect on those who took part in it, as well as the soldiers. From that day till the Battle of Waterloo, this brave general was always seen at the head of the Old Guard. Half an hour before we came to the first houses of Moscow, we reached a height from which we could see the town and its many belfries, those of the churches and of the Kremlin. These belfries have the form of a column, a pyramidal octagon, and are ornamented at the top with a sort of gilded pear, surmounted by a crescent and a cross fastened by small chains. We perceived a black smoke which rose from a point in the middle of the sky. It was a burning house, but it was the only fire that we saw at that time. It might have been 11 or half past. In less than an hour, we were in the city. We were surprised at not seeing any inhabitants except some poor people, whom we saw here and there. All the houses seemed deserted. We saw only Polish or French soldiers walking in the streets, and the nearer we got to the Kremlin, the more their number increased. As we turned the corner of the street, we met a Pole of the guard who had several bottles under his arms and all in his hands. He offered us one, which we accepted, but as he had nothing to open it, we handed it back to him, and he might knock off the neck against a stone. It was champagne. My companions and I poured it into our mouths. We found it very good. We continued on our way to the Kremlin, which we entered shortly afterwards by the gate on the west side. A little way from the gate, which we had just passed, we saw 3 or 4 Mamelukes sitting near a wall which was on the left of the road. They were dismounted men resting. We were not long in arriving at a sort of square, which I shall call the Court of the West. There we got down from the carriage and separated, each one going to join his fellows of the service to which he belonged. As I went to the place where my duty called me, I looked about at what was around me. The palace is composed of different buildings, making a whole, but of various styles of architecture. At the left of a large building in an oriental style, there is a broad staircase which ends in a paved interior court extending towards the right, at the end of which was a door communicating with the emperor's apartments. There, in the large room, I found the members of the service to which I belong.